Hi, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Ikaarvik, so please come in. Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit isn't probably what you think it is. From what we've seen, a lot of researchers tend to think it's just data, something you can collect and analyze. We know that researchers are always told to incorporate IQ into your research and meaningfully engage communities. But you might not have been told how to do these things. Don't worry, Ikaarvik's here to help you.
What's Ikaarvik?
We're a group of youth from different Nunavut and Yukon communities who are all interested in improving relationships between researchers and northern communities and seeing more meaningful incorporation of IQ into research.
Okay, cool. So you guys can be field assistants and bear monitors for us researchers.
No. Bear monitors and field assistants aren't really what Inuit communities see as meaningful engagement. In fact, many Arctic communities don't feel like they've been meaningfully engaged, consulted, or informed by researchers. We know that meaningful engagement and incorporating Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit into research has been left up to you guys to figure out on your own. So we're going to help with that.
Okay, so what is Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit?
Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit.
Qaujimajatuqangit.
Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit.
Qaujimajatuqangit.
Okay.
Finally, someone who is asking what we mean when we say IQ. Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit is a way of knowing. IQ is more than just traditional knowledge because it incorporates knowledge, customs, and values. It is our way of life. It is as much about how we interact with each other, our behaviors, and our attitudes, as well as what we know.
We chose to use Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit as a guide to help us interpret what meaningful engagement of Inuit communities and research can look like. We believe that understanding IQ from our perspective is what will lead to better work in our communities.
When you really understand Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, meaningful engagement of communities just happens naturally.
We created ScIQ to help you understand that incorporating IQ is equally about how a researcher works with the community, not just the data they collect. We believe that by following our recommendations, researchers can incorporate IQ in a way that meets the needs of both communities and scientists.
So, how do I do this? In reality, how am I supposed to apply this to my research?
Don't worry, we're here to help you. Ikaarvik Youth have created ScIQ, which is our way of explaining how science and Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit can work together.
ScIQ contains 41 recommendations for what you can do before, during, and after your research.
Oh, great. So it's a checklist. And if I do this...
Whoa, slow down. It's not a checklist. It's more about how you should work with the community. Maybe think of it this way. Don't think of it as a checklist of IQ actions, but having great IQ attitudes. This is what will result in better work with our communities.
It's not your fault because you probably didn't know this. When a scientist or researcher says that IQ is not valuable, you're saying that we Inuit are not valuable either. That our customs, our beliefs, and our way of life is not valuable. So because this is just a really big misunderstanding, we wanted to invite you in to work with our communities and provide you some recommendations for what we think it would look like to incorporate IQ into your research. And it might result in better research for you.
So you're telling me that we can create better research?
And it would lead for more meaningful engagement in our communities. All right, now let's look at some examples of our recommendations. So what you could do before your research is if you need a letter of support from the HTO or the Hamlet, please make sure that you try to get it way ahead of time. The HTO and the Hamlet are both very busy and the research is not their priority. So ensure that you have lots of time if you need letter support. It also depends on what time of year you might be trying to get your letter. Starting in the springtime and also during the summer, a lot of board members may not be available because they're spending a lot of time on the land. Things you could do during your research. Be a human first and a researcher second. So what that means is introduce yourself as your name first and not as a set of credentials. You could explain why you're here in Nunavut, but also share a little bit about yourself, like where you are from, your hobbies, and some of your interests. Just be human and just have regular conversations. And make sure you're friendly and ask the person you're talking to as well. Another thing to remember during your research is English is going to be a second language for a lot of people. So try not to use jargon and don't use big words because, again, English is their second language. I don't want to say simplify it, but like, don't use jargon. So if you're using jargon, it'd be like me saying, for example, you know that when you go out hunting and your qamutik, when you have a tea break, and then your qamutik freezes to the ground because you've been sitting for long, and the traction that it was building makes it warm, so that by the time you stop and you have tea, it's going to freeze, so that before you head out, you're going to have to kick the qamutik runners to make sure that they're not frozen, and so that when you take off, it'll be so much easier for it to take off. So if I'm explaining that and you didn't quite understand some of the stuff that I just explained, imagine how we feel when you talk about your research. You might know your research very well, but we haven't been studying your research as long as you have. So make sure, don't use jargon. And remember that English is a second language for a lot of us. I'm just going to tell you an example of a researcher who actually went to present to the NHTO in a community. And so this researcher was talking researcher introduced himself, and then he started talking about his research. And he was talking for about a good 5 minutes until he realized that no one spoke English. And so he spent all that time talking and no one even understood what he was trying to say. So if you're going to go to a community, make sure if you need an interpreter or a translator, make sure you can hire one. And when you come to a Nunavut community, make sure you involve the community in all stages of your research. So you could involve the community in determining your research questions to see what's important for the community members, the stuff that they want to know, what's impacting them, and also what they could do to help you and what you could do to help them to answer their questions. And then you could also have the community members help you collect this information, collect these data, collect the samples, and teach them the instruments that you're using and why you're using these instruments and what they're going to be collecting. And then you could also help the community help you analyze this data. One very good example is the Ikaarvik Modern River project that Ikaarvik is doing with Rosie Smith. So Rosie came to the community. So the youth came up with this research question on developing the river monitoring project, because the river is a very important source of water for the community, also food for their char. And so they were able to contact Rosie Smith, who's very knowledgeable about sampling in rivers. So she went to Ikaarvik and then she helped train the youth on how to use the instruments and methodologies for this project. And then she taught them how to collect these samples. And so she let the youth collect the samples for a few years. And then all the information and all the data she collected, all the information, the data that the youth collected were brought back up to be analyzed by the youth. And so we're in the stages right now where we're going to add a few more instruments. Everything is being done by the youth with the help of Rosie. So that's one very good example if you wanted to do a community-driven monitoring project, or if you wanted the community to help you. So just a quick overview of what we went through. We talked about what Ikaarvik is, what Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit is and how we interpret it, what our ScIQ documentation is, and some of our recommendations of what you could do before, during, and after your research. And I hope that these recommendations were helpful for you and that you'd like to work with us and the communities and have a better understanding of how you can interpret Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit and how you can meaningfully engage communities.
Hi, I've had the privilege of being mentored by Ikaarvik youth for a decade now, and just wanted to share very quickly my biggest takeaways as I've watched the youth work on this concept of ScIQ. We all know that researchers are asked to incorporate IQ into their work, and we know that researchers are also asked to meaningfully engage communities in the process of developing and conducting that work. What I've learned from these youth is that those are not really two different things. That the key to meaningfully engaging communities is actually incorporating IQ. And the key to incorporating IQ is understanding that IQ is not just about knowledge of, about the land and the environment It is definitely that, and that knowledge is tremendously important. But it's also about values, about customs, about principles for how we interact with each other and the environment. And that, to me, is the important part, because it isn't just about what we do. It's about how we do it that matters. So I have these truly amazing young people to thank for helping me understand what it really means when Inuit are asking that IQ be incorporated and that their communities be meaningfully engaged in research.
Speaking for myself, I can genuinely say that working with Inuit youth has been life-changing. I think it's made me a better researcher, a better human being, because I've learned how to actually stop and listen. And I think that ScIQ gives everybody the ability to tap into that amazing resource that Inuit youth have, which is the ability to bring joy and passion and equality into research. When I moved to Pond Inlet 20 years ago, I had no idea that I'd end up working with Inuit youth. I was a researcher, I was an anthropologist, I was going to do all this great work on traditional knowledge. And really the greatest gift of my life has been having the opportunity to work with these amazing young people who put their arms around my shoulder and basically said, all right, you kind of don't know what you're doing, but we're here to help you. I hope that you also see this as having that same arm put around your shoulders to help you do the most amazing job that you can do as a researcher.
So now that you kind of know what you could do to help improve your research within our communities, I'm going to invite you up. Make sure you use these recommendations. Let us know if they were helpful. If you have more questions, just reach out, and we'll see you soon after COVID.